Hey friends, I'm Rachel Grohl, and I'm your host for the Hearing Jesus podcast, where I help you to know God and to make Him known. Have you ever had an experience where you've walked through something and God has intervened and showed Himself faithful in that experience, and then you can't help it? The overflow of your heart is just a song of praise, essentially, where you can't help but tell everyone around you what He's done for you, that joy of that testimony. That joy is what we're going to be talking about today, where we're talking about singing the Lord a new song, and this idea of new song and what that means as an overflow of the testimony of His goodness. Today we're going to be walking through Psalm 96, and we are walking through one psalm a day in an effort to have a better understanding of what was essentially the hymn book and the prayer book of both Jesus and the disciples. It's the book that's referred to most in the Old Testament by Jesus and the disciples. And so there's tremendous value for understanding how they prayed or how they worshiped and some of the things that are contained within the book of the Psalms. And the Psalms really display for us a real sense of the human emotion that's common to the human experience. And while we are learning about early Israel, the history and the things that went on in Israel, it helps us understand the character and nature of God. And we know that that doesn't change. So that helps us in our spiritual walk today. As I read, I will be reading through the NIV. So starting in verse 1, sing to the Lord a new song, sing to the Lord all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise His name, proclaim His salvation day after day. Declare His glory among the nations, His marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before Him, strength and glory are in His sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of nations, ascribe to the Lord and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due His name. Bring an offering and come into His courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of His holiness. Tremble before Him and the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens rejoice, let the earth be glad, let the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Then all the trees of the forest will sing for joy. They will sing before the Lord, for He comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in His truth. So today we're talking essentially about music and the role that it played in Israelites' history. And we learn about this new song, and several times in the Old Testament, we have an understanding where there was a creation of new music. It was really common after there was like a military victory. We see that in Exodus, we see that in Judges, we see that in 1 Samuel. And then when the ark was brought to Jerusalem, if you remember, David commissioned a new song. We can read about that in 1 Chronicles. And so Psalm 96, it really is this experience. It's a response to any time God offers an occasion for rejoicing and singing. And music, especially in the Old Testament, it was really important to all aspects of life, really in the ancient Near East, all over, not just within Israel. Music was imperative for work, for war. It was entertainment. It was part of love, lullabies, of course. And so there was this fundamental element that was part of the Israelite culture that became their worship. And there was sophistication about it. I mean, we have texts all the way back from ancient Mesopotamia that describe singers and choirs and even the arrangement of different kinds of instruments into sections and orchestras. It was very, very elaborate. And there would oftentimes be dancers and acrobats and sometimes even things like performing animals that would be part of their worship and their dance, or even just the celebration of music itself. And so we see that throughout the scriptures. We see that music was a huge part of worship. And from the beginning, Israel's temple music was professionally organized. I mean, if you remember, the Levites were the tribe that was set apart for the running of the temple. And then the Levites themselves had specific worship leaders to organize the temple music. And so there was a lot of value that was placed on worship and music. It was part of their culture. When we talked a couple of weeks ago about Hezekiah and the tribute that he paid to the king of Assyria, and then eventually he stopped paying tribute, and we saw God's hand of deliverance during that whole situation. But in that first part of that story, one of the things that we learn is that Hezekiah actually sent singers and musicians as part of the tribute to that king. And so there was a lot of value placed on worship and music itself. In the book of Ezra, it talks about this function, so much so that it's important enough to talk about how the musicians returned from Zerubbabel after the exile. And so music is part of the culture in a way that I think sometimes we don't necessarily understand. And while we certainly have a value for worship and music, if you think even just logically where they were at, we have all sorts of social media and computers and books and all of these things, but they did not have that. And at that time frame, music would have been something that was really so integral to part of their lives, and the development of the musical ability really just from a time frame aspect, like they had so much more time on their hands to really develop that craft. This passage talks a lot about worship in response to God's acting on their behalf. And because we know the context of this portion of the Psalms is in book 4, and we know that this is like right on the edge of either the return of the exile or after they've already gotten back from the exile. So what most scholars believe is that this praise psalm is talking about singing to the Lord a new song that was really written in response to God's deliverance and a testimony of God's faithfulness as he delivered them from the exile itself. I think for those of us who have received salvation, and by salvation, of course, I mean the forgiveness of sins, and we have developed this personal relationship with God. For those of us that have experienced that, there is this element of wanting to tell others about the goodness of God. And especially at the beginning of our spiritual lives, there is an overflow of our hearts where we just want to tell people naturally. We want to tell people about who God is and the way that he loves us. But then also when there's opportunities to share what God is doing in our lives, that does also produce in us this desire to tell other people about that. And so there's a command there to declare the glory among the nations. And what that is doing is it's pointing forward to the Great Commission that Jesus gave, which is, of course, to go into all the world and to preach the gospel. And that word gospel, of course, means the good news about Jesus to all the nations. And so we see this theme of having a testimony, whether it is with words or with song, but to constantly share what God is doing in our lives. That is how we evangelize. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things. Evangelism can really be sharing, or at least start from this place of sharing what God is doing in your own personal life. The best way to evangelize is to share with somebody else what God has done for you in your life. While there is a lot in this psalm that is pretty self-explanatory and easy to understand on the surface level, there's 4 things I want to point out just to make sure that you don't look over it. And it's this idea of the Lord reigning. And so the psalm describes 4 elements of God's kingdom. His reign is based on righteousness and justice. The second is that, and that was starting in verse 2. The second is that his ruling power extends over all the earth. We see that in verses 1 through 6 and again in verse 9. The third is that his victory is over false gods, and that's certain. And you have to remember, in the ancient world, they believed in other gods. Those gods were just all lesser than Yahweh, who is the God above all gods. And we know, of course, that's false. There's only one God. But at the time in the ancient world, outside of Israel, they had false gods that covered everything from the weather to the sun and everything in between. And that his followers, and what I mean by followers is those who do what he desires and then remain in this right relationship with him, they will experience freedom, protection, and joy. We see that in verses 8 through 12.
Hi, friends. It's Annie F. Downs here, and I am so beyond excited to share with you that I have a brand new TV show called I Gotta Ask that begins airing Thursday, May 28th on The Wonder Project, which you can find through your Amazon Prime Video app. You may have heard of The Wonder Project because they're the ones who brought you The House of David, and I am so honored and honestly have zero chill that I get to partner with them to make this dream come true. I love how how Wonder Project is not only creating great original TV and movies that audiences can experience together, but also curating content via their subscription on Prime Video filled with meaningful stories. The first 2 episodes of my talk show, I Gotta Ask, premiere on May 28th, followed by 2 episodes each on June 4th and June 11th. In every episode, I sit down with a group of friends, some experts in their fields and some thought leaders, some just my real life people. And we talk about things like, why is dating so hard in 2026? Or how do I build a business? What do I do with fear and anxiety? And so many more questions that I just had to ask. I cannot wait to hear what you think. You can subscribe today at igotaask.com.
And so what this psalm does is it's prophesying the coming of Christ and the establishment of the kingdom. And if you read in Revelation 19 through 22, you can read more about that kingdom that will be established here on earth. But this event will mean that there is a death and a destruction of the opposite, those who defy God. And so there's a great joy to those who serve and trust God, but also then this warning for those that don't. And I think that's really important because while we are focusing on the declaration of God's glory and his goodness, it's also a call to share that glory and goodness for others, because we know that eventually it's going to catch up with them, whether in this world or the next. And between that and just the natural way that we have an opportunity to share the testimony of what God is doing in our lives when he's operating, I think both of those are calls to evangelize and share the good news of the gospel with those that are around us. There is this sense throughout the scriptures where, as believers, we all kind of long for this liberation from the bondage of decay and sin and evil in the world. And we all long for that every time we turn on the news or we hear what's going on in this world around us, where we want to be brought into this place of freedom and glory as the children of God. And while it is a contrast to the frustration of what we might sense in this world today, it gives us something to look forward to. And I think that's such a mark of love for those around us when we include them in the hope that is to come because of what we read in the gospel, what we read throughout the scriptures. And so I think that's my encouragement for you. That's my insight for you today, that to not share that message, that hope that we have with those around us, is a selfish act and ultimately is going to keep those around us from knowing the truth and the hope of the gospel. So I'm going to go ahead and read 96, starting in verse 1 again, and hopefully maybe that gives you a little bit of insight how to understand it and pray through this verse or this passage. Sing to the Lord a new song. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Sing to the Lord, praise his name. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord and most worthy of praise. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and glory are in his sanctuary. Ascribe to the Lord, O families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come into his courts. Worship the Lord in the splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. Say among the nations, the Lord reigns. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. He will judge the peoples with equity. Let the heavens rejoice. Let the earth be glad. Let the sea resound and all that is in it. Let the fields be jubilant and everything in them. Then all the trees of the forest will sing for joy. They will sing before the Lord, for he comes. He comes to judge the earth. He will judge the world in righteousness and the peoples in his truth. God, we thank you for even the tension that we feel as we long to worship you and to use music to praise you and to sing and glorify your name. But also let that serve as a reminder to share your message of hope with the world around us. Lord, I pray that even now, as we think about rejoicing and singing a new song about the testimony of your goodness in our lives, Lord, help that also to prompt us to share that message with those around us. Lord, would you even just drop a name in our heart or a face in our mind's eye to think about what it means to share you with others and the joy that they're missing out on. Lord, help us to always serve in that place as an overflow of our relationship with you. It's in your name we ask these things. Amen. Hey friend, a quick break from the episode to tell you about something I don't want you to miss. This November, I'm hosting Bible Study Live in Rome, and I want to personally invite you to join me. You won't just learn about the Bible, you'll experience it live. We'll visit Luke's house, where Paul was held under house arrest and where Luke likely wrote part of his gospel. We'll stand in the Mamertine prison where Paul and Peter were imprisoned before they died, and where Paul wrote his final words in 2 Timothy. We'll walk through the catacombs, the birthplace of the underground church, and we'll step into the Colosseum, where early Christians were persecuted and gave their lives for their faith. It's not just about these sites, it's also about what happens in between. Each morning, we'll gather together for Bible study, letting God speak to us in these sacred spaces. In the evenings, we'll pause for worship and prayer, reflecting on all He's doing in our hearts. We'll enjoy fellowship, guided sightseeing, and rest each night in a beautifully restored villa nestled in the countryside overlooking Rome. This isn't just about history, it's about transformation. It's a sacred space to reconnect with God, to deepen your faith, and to walk where the early church once stood. So if your heart is longing for more, don't wait. Head to BibleStudyLive.org to grab your spot. Come be a part of something that could change everything.